I'm Mary Sauer-Games, OCLC Vice President of Global Product Management. We are pleased to have OCLC staff and members of the global library community join us virtually for today's Distinguished Seminar Series presentation. I'd like to share some context about this series and then introduce our speaker. OCLC Research has hosted the Distinguished Seminar Series since 1978 to encourage the exchange of ideas and thought leadership on topics that impact libraries, library staff, and librarianship. We invite distinguished professionals to share their knowledge and perspectives with OCLC staff and the library community to challenge our own thinking and inspire our work. To date, we have hosted more than 50 speakers on a variety of topics, and we are very excited about today's topic and speaker. Rebekkah Smith Aldrich is the Executive Director of the Mid-Hudson Library System in New York. She is co-founder and president of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative and principal author of the Sustainable Library Certification Program. Her presentation today on sustainability is a call to action for the library community. OCLC's values are aligned with the goals of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative to achieve sustainability through commitments to environmental stewardship, economic feasibility, and social equity. And as a partner to the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, OCLC developed a mobile app for the initiative's roadmap to sustainability in the spring of 2022. And this app is freely available to all. So we are delighted to support this initiative to inspire and help keep libraries on a path to sustainability. And to continue these efforts, OCLC is currently working with Rebekkah to develop a series of webinars and resources on sustainability that will be available later this year through WebJunction. Rebekkah is also spending time with OCLC's sustainability team as we take a look at our own efforts in this space. And you may have seen our most recent announcement on Earth Day about our newest WorldCat content page. Collaborating with environmental organizations and experts, we are showcasing valuable sustainability and conservation materials from more than 10,000 library collections. These resources, presented as a curated collection in worldcat.org, make it fast and convenient to find trusted information for you to gain a deeper understanding of sustainability. We are so thrilled to have Rebekkah here with us today as she shares information about challenges and opportunities for libraries and inspires us to take action in the face of climate change. Rebekkah, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Oh, Mary, thank you so much. And thanks to the audience for joining us here today. I couldn't be more excited to be here. It's really fantastic to see OCLC's very visible commitment to sustainability. And I want to thank the team at OCLC that's been working with me for months to produce this event and make sure you have resources in your hand that are very practical and useful to you after today's presentation. So I want to say that it's not just me that's here from the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. I have the pleasure of working with colleagues far and wide, thanks to the Sustainable Libraries Initiative and the American Library Association. So I just want to acknowledge all of those wonderful colleagues that I know are out there and have been helping with this work for over a decade that really are part of the story that are here today. I wish I could give you, each and every one of you, a shout out, but they only gave me like 45 minutes here. So as we move forward today, I just want to say that a part of our goal is to make sure you have a broad overview of the topic. You get a kind of a front row seat of a strategy that's been working for us through the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, and that you get to see really practical frontline examples from libraries in the Sustainable Library Certification Program. These are folks who have made that organizational commitment to sustainability as a core value, and they're living their values out loud. So we want to let you know what that looks like so you can maybe be inspired by some of them, or maybe recognize you're doing a pretty good job wherever you're sitting as well. But the idea here is that this is a call to action, that it's not enough to catalog what we already do and say we're being sustainable. We really need to think differently about the future. So we're going to start broad and we'll narrow down to those practical examples, but here we go. So I told you we're going to start broad. I don't know how much more broad I can get than showing you a picture of planet Earth here, and noting that it's pretty cool to be talking to an international audience here today, because I know sustainability efforts look different from country to country. So as we think about our place in this world and our influence on this world, I always try to keep in mind one of my favorite quotes of all time from Alvin Toffler, who wrote the book Future Shock back in the 70s. And he said, you have to think about big things while you do small things, so all the small things go in the right direction. And that's what we're talking about when it comes to sustainability. We have to understand the broader implications of the choices we make every single day, not only on the environment, but on each other, whether that's in our local neighborhoods or our global community that we are all a member of. So again, I promise we were starting broad. Here we go. So as we look back at 2020, we might all remember we're actually kind of still in a pandemic, and we were in the heat of the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. And buried in the newspaper headlines about those times in our life, you will see climate scientists trying to talk to all of us about what was going on, and noting that we will look back on 2020 and 2021 and now 2022 and 2023 as the good old days, back when it wasn't that bad. Because the truth is, even if we do everything right from this moment on to mitigate climate change, we have several more decades of increasingly severe weather and impacts from climate change to contend with. The future, what it holds for us, hotter temperatures, more frequent and severe weather that's really going to devastate a lot of areas of our world. We're going to be looking at a lack of biodiversity, warming and rising sea levels. We're going to have food scarcity issues. We're going to have increasingly important health issues to contend with as we think about the effects on our natural world that bleed into the effects on the human population of our world. So starting out kind of as a bummer here, I know, but I think we've all got to understand that what we see now is kind of nothing compared to what's coming. And understanding that the work we've been doing, it's not quite enough. And you'll see in the viewing guide just call to action after call to action from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They've been trying for decades to get our attention and get us moving on these topics. And the truth is, many of us are moving on these topics, but just not fast enough. Predictions say 1.2 billion people will be displaced. They are going to be called climate refugees. They're going to have to move and be displaced from where they live today because of the impacts of climate change. That's coming in the next just 25 years. That's right here, right now. It's already happening. We already have our government's funding support for climate refugees. And we have to think about what will that mean for the areas impacted by the folks, by the areas those folks are leaving, as well as the folks those folks are moving to. These are going to be major human impacts and economic impacts on our world, something that's hard to imagine, but something that must be confronted. So I wanted to point out that another headline that you may or may not have seen back in 2021, November of 2021, something pretty amazing happened. Over 200 medical journals worldwide, every continent, issued the same call to action, raising awareness of people that climate change is the #1 threat to global public health. They double down by pointing out, to give you the visualization, that every single child alive today will be negatively impacted by climate change. So now you need to find your motivation where you're going to find your motivation. I understand a lot of the folks that I work with are motivated by the thoughts of their children. And what does the generation look like that's coming up after us? And what world are we giving them by the choices that we make on an everyday basis? And so as we think about these calls to action in many different industries, how proud are we to see that in the library community, we're also right there with these calls to action, mobilizing our industry to think differently about the future. Last year, the American Library Association's Council Committee on Sustainability issued this briefing, trying to help more folks in the library community understand the scope and scale and urgency of this topic. And you'll see here quotes from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The Secretary General called this a code red for humanity, and it is undoubtedly the grandest challenge of our generation. That can feel pretty overwhelming as we start to think and learn more about climate change, how it's happening, why it's happening, and what we're all going to be doing about it in the coming years. So as we start to think about the practicality of acting and something that's so systemic and so enormous, touching on almost every aspect of our life, you can almost be paralyzed by the thoughts that might be racing through your head about this. But the truth is, we have to all embrace the idea that every job is a climate job. And I borrowed this from Project Drawdown, which has been doing excellent work to collate the opinions and the truth and the data and the science behind climate change solutions. What are the smartest things for us to be working on? And let's band together and work on those, and do so from wherever you sit in this world, wherever you are on this globe, whatever job you hold, whatever neighborhood you live in, whatever your family unit looks like. We all need to embrace our personal responsibility to do something different moving forward, and hopefully going in the right direction, using the advice of experts that have really studied this issue and are helping to direct our energy towards the things that will make the biggest difference moving forward. So the American Library Association adopted sustainability as a core value of the profession in 2019. Obviously something that I'm personally pretty excited about, and a lot of the colleagues that I get to work with are very excited about, because it was a very public declaration that the library workers of the United States and hopefully beyond need to prioritize this as a value set as we think about how we do the work in our libraries and in our information institutions. So thinking about the kind of galvanizing opportunity the American Library Association gave us here in the US, it's been a very exciting developments coming since 2019 on this front. But a lot of it is because of the work we've done to be very deliberate in how we talk about sustainability, the conceptual models we use to talk about this, and how we make it accessible for as many libraries as possible, small, medium, large, rural, suburban, urban, however big your budget is. We want entry points for our libraries of all shapes and sizes to find their way to this work and to really think differently about the choices they're making with the dollars that are entrusted to them to produce library services. So I'm a member of the Center for the Future of Libraries Advisory Board, and we had a project where they identified trends impacting the library community. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this project. And a lot of them are very interesting. They were talking about artificial intelligence before years before most of us were thinking about it and seeing it in the headlines here this year. But one of the ones that caught my attention very early on was this idea of collective impact, which is an idea that's been around for a very long time. This is not new. But the idea that we all have very good intentions, but a lot of times our impact just isn't quite there at the level we would hope. And that really requires organizing. We have to organize ourselves to share our values, to move forward in ways that have a collective impact. And the truth is, we can't do that by ourselves. We can't do that alone in our institutions. Our institutions can't do it alone in their communities. And we as an industry can't be isolated in how we talk about this and act on this topic. So this little graphic here showing you how great intentions, we're kind of dancing around doing our own thing. And then we kind of get organized, right? And start all pulling in the same direction. And that's when really amazing things start to happen. We start to model great behavior for our communities. We start to make an impact and become known as agencies and institutions that really care about our library workers and about the people that we serve. And that's really what we're here to talk about today, is having a collective impact on the topic of climate change. So I mentioned a common vocabulary, and at the American Library Association and the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, we've adopted the triple bottom line definition of sustainability. And now you might think this sounds kind of old. It came out back in the 80s, but you know what? I've been talking about this topic in our profession for over 15 years. And light bulbs did not start to go off for people until I started flashing this slide in front of them, because people were treating it like a checklist. Oh, right, on Earth Day, we pay attention to this. Oh, maybe for the whole month of April, we'll pay attention to this. And oh, yes, I have my reusable water bottle with me. But we need people to understand the systemic nature of climate change and how it is tied not only to our environmental choices, but our economic choices, and most importantly, the choices we make and how we treat people locally and globally. So as we see here, the triple bottom line is really defining sustainability as the intersection of these three things. To bring these three things into balance is how we get to sustainability. So that's what you're going to see today, is a bunch of examples that are trying really hard to think all of this through and understand how all these threads connect together. So we make decisions, maybe they're not perfect, but they're better than they were yesterday, because we understand a little more about how the world works, how money is spent, and how other agencies in our world might be trying to influence to do things that are really not the best choice for us as humans. So our idea is that libraries should be seen as sustainability leaders. We want to be known for this. We want people to recognize us for this. And we want to be let's be honest, we want people to invest in us because this is a value set that we've embraced and are carrying out in practice. And so this is something that, a lot of libraries are library people, right? We're chronically humble. We don't always try to position ourselves for the attention. We're really in it to help people. And so as you start to think about the ripple effects of the choices that you make, the work you do in the library industry, in the library world, we have to think about what values do we express by the choices we make? What are those nonverbal cues we give people about our facilities, our programs and services, how we operate our institutions, how we treat our library workers, and where we decide to develop collections, programs, services, and partnerships? All of that adds up to tell a story about who we are as institutions. And so positioning ourselves as leaders requires commitment, and commitment from the top, as well as a grassroots understanding of what we're doing, so we all meet in the middle and do good work on behalf of our communities. So this has to be centered locally. And I think this is one of the most beautiful things we learned through this process, that it's not going to be Rebekkah talking at the OCLC workshop about what's going to work in your community. You have to discover what's most important where you live, where your organization is centered. What are the number one challenges that your folks are dealing with? Where are the opportunities to work together? I don't know that answer for you. You're going to have to figure it out and find other people who want to work on that too and band together and make good things happen. And so you're going to see that throughout the presentation today. So I know a lot of folks here are from outside of the United States. I just want to acknowledge your countries are doing a much better job perhaps than we have in the US by using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Here in the US, we stuttered on that for a variety of reasons we're not going into today. But I'll just say that if we break this down for the folks in the US, this has been working really, really well. The 17 categories of the Sustainable Development Goals are fantastic for measurement and for aligning with other institutional and governmental goals. But to spur folks to action, we have to make it simpler and more focused on local. So in our world, we define climate action as the combination of climate mitigation, climate adaptation, combined with climate justice. And that's what climate action looks like. So as we start to think of all the different things we kind of equate with sustainability, environmental sustainability, the triple bottom line, like just so much stuff, right? But let's really get focused on this equation and start to look at where we spend our time and energy to make a difference on this topic. There are areas of focus. And so let's take a look at those as we move through this morning. So first, I'm going to unpack this idea of climate change mitigation, and that's going to be what you're probably most familiar with when you think about climate change and the changes that are necessary to be made. This is good old reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which folks have been crying for decades, right? We need to stop warming the atmosphere so it stops heating up the earth, heating up the air, heating up the wind currents, the water currents, stop superheating the ocean. All of these things are causing those increased severe weather, the seawater rising, the crazy weather patterns. How many of you learned the phrase atmospheric river for the first time this year? Derecho last year. These are words that we weren't familiar with, but now are massive weather events that are wrecking devastation across areas of the world. So as we start to think about the immediate acute effects of climate change, we want to mitigate that for the future. We want to reduce how bad it will be in the future. And that's why we have to prioritize work to bring down the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly from the built environment, transportation, and food waste issues. So as we start to see libraries step up in this area, we're seeing more and more libraries prioritize energy efficiency, switching over to renewable energy, and setting new and more challenging goals for themselves when it comes to their facilities. I'm proud to talk about the Hendrick Hudson Free Library, which was the very first library certified under the Sustainable Library Certification Program. Shout out to Jill Davis and her team there at that library. Just a laundry list of fantastic decisions they've made at that library. And you can see here, one of the first libraries here in New York State to have a solar array, really leading the way in modeling this for other people, not just of the libraries in the state, but really talking about this in the community in a way more people can relate to. You can see they have this huge television monitor right smack in the children's room that's educating folks about the choices the library has made, why they made those choices, what it's resulting in. What do you know? It's good for the environment, and it costs us less to run this library to make this better choice for the environment. Win, 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 right? So as we start to make these better choices, we have to remember to tell the story of why we made those choices and why people should care about those choices. This library is now looking at 84% of their electricity being covered by the solar panels, and they're now working on a battery supply system that will make them even more resilient in the face of extended power outages moving forward. So this is, I think, kind of basic stuff we should all be integrating into how we think about the future of library facilities. And you can see this happening on a much larger scale out in California. The San Diego County Library, the first California library to join our certification program, they've got some really big goals and very big commitment from their municipality, which supports this library. You can see they just opened a brand new branch library, and it's net zero energy. And in fact, every single one of their construction projects on the horizon is net zero, meaning they're going to produce all the energy they need to run that library on site from renewable sources. They've transitioned their fleet, so you can see their bookmobile is also an electronic vehicle. They're not relying on fossil fuels to get that bookmobile around the county. And they just announced this year that at all of their locations will be electric vehicle charging stations, because one of the biggest challenges to electrifying transportation at the individual level is having the infrastructure for those cars to be charged. So as we think about it, wouldn't it be an awesome talking point to be able to say, every library in the country, go charge your car, go into the library while you're at it. It's a very good opportunity for libraries. And there's a lot of money, at least here in the US, to fund that infrastructure at libraries. Our next example here is a smaller library in Massachusetts, the Concord Library, which has set a very big goal for itself. They're going to be carbon neutral by the year 2030, and they wrote a plan for how they're going to get there. So very cool. It's available online. You can check it out. They also are an example in one of the webinars we have on our site, sustainablelibraries.org, talking about their goals and thinking about how they're going to achieve the carbon neutrality they're looking for as an institution. So by 2030, they're aligning themselves with the goals not only of their local community, but the global conversation about this race in the next decade to turn things around. They're right there on the front of that, and one of the only libraries that's publicly stated that goal. So go Concord, you're leading the way on this. One of my favorite examples of this in this section of climate change mitigation happened right here in New York State with one of our very own advisory board members, Lisa Kropp, at the Lindenhurst Memorial Library in Suffolk County. This is a picture which realized a dream, and I'm just going to give a shout out to Matthew Bollerman, the co-founder of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, because when he was asked, what does success look like in our initiative, he said, when legislators start saying libraries are sustainability leaders. And last year on Earth Day, we saw a press conference held in the parking lot of the Lindenhurst Memorial Library with the Suffolk County Executive Director, County Executive, making an announcement. They're investing millions of dollars in electric vehicle charging infrastructure that would be located at libraries throughout the county. During the day, library patrons can charge their cars there, and the evenings, county cars, the county fleet, will be charged using that infrastructure. And he literally said, I am here today because of the leadership of the Lindenhurst Library on the topic of climate action. That's what we want, folks. We want other people seeing us as leaders on this topic, as allies in this work, and as partners where they're not only going to invest goodwill and high fives, but cash to help us do this work alongside them. So let's transition a bit and talk about climate change adaptation. And this is an unfortunate reality that the effects of climate change, they're here now. And that means we have to help figure out how our communities are going to adapt in the face of what is happening right now, whether that be increasing heat waves, storms that are behaving in ways we just haven't seen before or lasting a very long time and just stressing out our communities, damaging homes, risking lives. These are things that we know are here, we know are coming, and we can help our communities as well as our institutions be more resilient in the face of that. So the number one thing we have to do is think about what are the top climate hazards in your part of the world. Being really familiar with what is likely, what's predicted, what's going to be picking up the pace in your part of the world is the first thing to do, because we have to plan towards that, not this whole list, the things that are most likely to affect your area of the world. And I've got to say, there's just better and better data to tap into about this. I just went to a program last week with the group here in the United States, FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they revealed the new data sets we're able to access through the National Disaster Index, which was just so powerful to be able to see the data laid out geographically so we could better understand, oh, okay, well, in this area, we're going to see an increase in drought. We're going to see an increase in rainfall. You might think to yourself, of course I know what's going to happen. But you know what? Not everyone in your community is paying attention. So I encourage you to find out what data sets you have access to, what visualization portals are out there to figure this out, and designing your disaster preparedness and community resilience plans around these things, and aligning yourself with the emergency management folks in your neck of the woods that is doing good work in this area, so they see library institutions as part of that community asset map they can draw upon to do the planning for preparation, incident management, and post-disaster recovery. So disaster preparedness is something that libraries have talked about for many, many years, and I'm sure many of you have connected with the fantastic resources of the New Jersey State Library, which you'll see right in the viewing guide. So shout out to Michelle Stricker, the Deputy State Librarian there in New Jersey, who's done fantastic work to align with emergency management folks and help libraries understand it's not just about traditional disaster preparedness work where we're trying to make sure our buildings and our institutions are able to get back up and running quickly. We need to put that in the context of library services for the people of our communities and making sure that the people of our communities are prepared as well. And here's a great example from the South Huntington Public Library. Janet Shears, the director there, she's on the board of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. They focus on two aspects here, just as we were talking about. On the right-hand side, you see a whole building generator being put in. A very hard lesson they learned during Superstorm Sandy back in 2012 was they couldn't get the library back up and running because the power grid was out for an extended period of time. So now they've got a whole building generator so they can get back up and running and serving the public on a much faster timeline. They've also really focused on community preparedness and doing so in ways that are fun and engaging, and asking kids to be a part of this work too, so they're not so afraid of what's happening when they see the headlines and they hear people talking about climate change. We want to empower people to understand you can prepare, you can be ready to work together, and we really want to thank our first responder community who is always prepared and always thinking about our safety. So you see a variety of programs they've done at this library to do all of those things. So it's just woven into the library's program schedule. It's not only during Climate Preparedness Week or on Earth Day or doing our program we do here in New York State called the Great Give Back. It's just part of what we do all the time. The Climate Resilience Hub program is of growing interest to libraries here in the US, and I really love their model because I think it gives you a really easy entry point to start thinking about a library's role in community preparedness in the face of climate change. So you've got that link right in the viewing guide. I hope you'll check it out. They're doing really excellent work. The other big thing we have to think about is how our facilities can be used as cooling centers, warming centers, and recovery centers. We have critical public infrastructure that people can rely on in these moments if we're prepared in that and we embrace those roles. So as you can see here, the Queens Public Library, one of the busiest libraries, if not the busiest library in the United States, has really embraced this role, understanding that so many folks in our communities don't have air conditioning. And the heat waves that are coming and the increased temperatures that we are predicted to have is actually the number one thing that will impact negatively public health in our world because of climate change. Sounds kind of basic, right? But the truth is, areas of the country, we were just in a meeting yesterday with people from the state of Vermont that said most people in Vermont don't have air conditioning, but they're being kind of confronted with the idea that temperatures are going up. This is going to get very uncomfortable, and soon people are not just going to be uncomfortable, they're going to feel unwell. So where can we go in our communities to cool down? It's a significant public health issue that most libraries will have to contend with moving forward into the next few decades. I also want to talk a little bit about food. I think it's one of those ubiquitous issues that I think we really got a hard lesson in during the early days of the pandemic. Here in the US, we saw how scarce food became very quickly when food supply chains were disrupted due to the pandemic. What you're also going to see is food supply disruptions because of climate change. And so we're seeing an increasing number of libraries embracing this idea of bridging the gaps we find in the food supply networks in our local communities. This is one of our favorite examples from the Northern Onondaga Public Library in the Syracuse area. They actually have dedicated part of their property to be a library farm. So you can use your library card and borrow a raised plot, grow your own fruits and vegetables, but half the property is dedicated to community-supported agriculture. So people come to programs at the library to learn about gardening and preserving, and they grow food together for the local pantries and shelters. They're even selling as a fundraiser hot sauce that was made from the peppers grown at the library farm. So very cool example there from Northern Onondaga. This is another one of our libraries in the certification program, Curtis Memorial in the state of Maine. You can see here edible landscaping. They're taking every little opportunity to not only have programs for the public, but to make choices on their own property that tell the story of what they are doing and why they are doing it. So shout out to Curtis Memorial. And possibly, in my opinion, one of the best examples of a program that fits the triple bottom line model is the Repair Cafe. You might call it Fix It Clinic, but the Repair Cafe movement came out of the Netherlands. And here in the Northeast, we have the most repair cafes outside of the Netherlands here in the US. If you're not familiar with this program, I encourage you to do so. But let me just share with you why I like it so much. This program invites people from the community who are experts at repairing things to teach their neighbors how to repair stuff. They're creating community by learning together. They're keeping stuff out of the waste stream. They're reminding us all that we don't always have to buy new. We can fix the stuff we already have. So we're taking stuff out of the waste stream. We're creating community in these moments. We're respecting the local wisdom of people that live in our communities. And I just think it hits the sweet spot of that triple bottom line. Really excellent example of what a resilient and sustainable community is going to look like. This is one of my own programs here in my library system. You might not realize it, but I have a day job. I help 66 public libraries here in the Hudson Valley of New York, and it is my pleasure of my lifetime to help them. They do such good work, and I just appreciate the work they do so much. 16 of our libraries are now, we have 66 libraries, and 16 of them are what we call the Library of Local. They've curated specific collections on climate change solutions, food security issues. They have seed lending libraries, tool lending libraries. They do specific programming that brings people together to think about some of these key issues we're talking about with climate change mitigation and adaptation. So what they're doing is curating a new collection for their library, which are the neighbors that live in their community. People are volunteering, people are identifying themselves as master gardeners, master beekeepers, master preservers, and we're starting to see a whole new level of collection development in these libraries. We've also aligned those locations with a state program here in New York called Climate Smart Communities. So the folks that are maybe not always connected to the library see the library doing similar work in a parallel, and we're starting to see cross-pollination. We're starting to see those committees have their meetings at libraries, use the resources of the Library of Local, and accelerate the work in their communities by more hands joining the work that needs to get done. So shout out to my libraries that are in this program. So climate justice was the other part of that equation for climate action. And this is a topic or a phrase that we hear a lot. We hear a lot of lip service given to, but let's see it in action thanks to libraries. This is part of the work that needs to be embedded in how we think about the climate change work we do in libraries. And so climate justice is that combination of those issues in that triple bottom line, all with a lens of justice in the work that we do, to make sure that in our efforts to make better choices on behalf of the climate, we don't disenfranchise people that are making things, that are earning money in a high carbon economy, people that are affected by changes where natural resources are being used to solve other problems in other parts of the world. We have to remember this is a holistic issue that impacts many parts of our economy and our society. And so doing this work with justice in our hearts as we think about the impact on others of the choices that we are making is how we avoid being hypocritical in the work that we're trying to do. So when we think about what is climate justice, what does this look like moving forward, I highly recommend the book Heat Wave by Eric Kleinenberg. And that author's name might be familiar to you because yes, he is the author of Palaces to the People, the really ode to libraries that is just so fulfilling for library workers to read. This book came out before he wrote Palaces for the People. And you'll see what he did was a study of the effects of a massive heat wave on neighborhoods in the city of Chicago and Illinois here in the US. And really what it revealed was those communities that were more socially cohesive, those where more people knew each other, had more respect and empathy and understanding for each other, had a higher survivability rate than those communities where folks maybe were a bit wealthier, lived a little more in isolation, didn't really know their neighbors or understand maybe who lived alone or who didn't have air conditioning. So we're literally talking about a life and death choice of how we build community in the modern world. So as you think about climate disasters, they do not impact everyone equally. It doubles down on marginalization that has already happened on populations, and it really exacerbates existing issues for low-income folks. So as we think about an evacuation order, let's all leave this area, a big storm is coming. Not everyone has the money to evacuate, or a place to go. So as we start to think about educating emergency management folks about the needs of all people, not just people perhaps that look like them or have the same level of income as they do, we have to be amplifying the voices of folks who have been left out of some of those discussions for many, many years. So this is a very broad topic, and I understand that. In the time that we're given here today to talk about this, I wanted to bring to your attention a conceptual model, which gives us a visual framework to understand the intersections of all of the things we've been talking about here this morning. This is the framework developed by the economist Kate Raworth out of the UK. She wrote this fantastic book called Donut Economics, helping us all understand how to transition the economy to a world that respects the ecological limits, as well as building up those social foundations and finding a safe and just place for us to create community in between these things. She's actually done work to measure what this looks like country to country so we can understand what this looks like. And I'll just point out the latest book from the American Library Association's ALA Editions imprint, Libraries and Sustainability. Chapter 12 is about translating donut economics for libraries. So as you start to think about the impact of libraries and the choices we make and how we're going to make that shift, that's a great primer to think about the economy and the economics of libraries and the choices that we make. So I mentioned the dashboard that they have. This is what it looks like. I know you feel like overwhelmed on the left when you're looking at, oh my gosh, that's a lot of stuff all at once. But right, we've got to recognize it's systemic, and how do you keep your eye on all these things at once? On the right-hand side, you see an aggregate of the results of measurement of all of the countries across the globe and how they're doing and respecting the ecological ceiling and building up the social foundation to create a more just community for us to live in. And you can see some patterns, unfortunately, on the right-hand side of this slide that really start to show where the work needs to be done, where more attention needs to be paid, and where more people need to come together to help in different areas of this work. So, bottom line, shifts don't happen overnight. We have to shift the culture of our organizations. This requires an individual mindset shift as well as a cultural mindset shift. And that's what we've been working on at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. This is an overwhelming topic. Where do you get started? I mentioned Matthew Ballerman, the other co-founder of Sustainable Libraries Initiative before. We did presentations for years where people would be very excited about what we were talking about. And they would come up to talk to us afterwards and be like, okay, where do we start? And we were like, good for you. Great question. We'll get back to you on that. And so here we are. We're getting back to you on that because what we've tried to do is research the heck out of this and figure out how to help libraries embed this thinking in their organizations and do so in a way that will last a generation. So as the famous tennis star and humanitarian Arthur Ashe said, you got to start where you are, use what you have, and just do what you can, right? We can only move forward from here. We can't fix what's happened in the past. So as you start to think about building more support for this work, either in your community, in your institution, at home with your family, we have to remember this is a process that people need to be brought along on. They don't all have the same level of understanding you may have in this moment. You may not have the understanding you wish you had in this moment. And that's why we're all here together today. So just that reminder that we have to create and remind people there's a sense of urgency behind this work, and we have to work together. And let's identify what the barriers are. And maybe we don't all have all the answers just yet, but that doesn't mean we don't do anything. You've still got to start moving forward, even if it's not perfect. And that's kind of an idea we embraced at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative and has kept us going for many, many years. And so here's what we've learned. There's 4 attributes of a sustainable library. A sustainable library must act with authenticity. It must be a strong institution that's going to be around to support those that their mission is to serve. You have to live those values out loud through your policy, your actions, the decisions you make as an institution and a workplace. And you must devote energy deliberately to social cohesion and civic participation. We must engage our communities in this work so more folks are working on the right stuff in the right moments and come together in those moments of post-disruption that are sometimes hard to predict, but when we come together, we can make better for everyone. And then we've got to see those 2 aspects of climate action integrated into our thinking, into our planning, into our real everyday lives here in our libraries. So again, climate change mitigation and adaptation, both aspects of that equation need to be built into our strategic planning moving forward. So I'll just point out that Mary mentioned right up front that OCLC helped us create a really interactive mobile app for you. You've got links to it. If you're like me, you like things in print, you can also get a PDF of the roadmap to sustainability. You can get that through our website, no charge, to sign up for the newsletter. And then if you were like, ho-hum, we got it, we understand this all, we're ready to be certified. We do have the Sustainable Library Certification Program, which is built with a number of intersections, from the Sustainable Development Goals to ASHE stars to thinking of all those different programs that are out there. We made one for libraries that actually talks about what we do, what we're strong at, where we have opportunities to make better choices. And so what you'll learn for the public and academic libraries, you'll see 12 different categories. And we're super proud to announce, as of Monday, we have opened up the program nationally for academic libraries. This is a long time coming. We thank our pilot libraries for helping us get there, but the public library community is going strong. We've got over 100 libraries working on this, these certification programs, which is just exponentially building the examples of how libraries do work in this, what lessons were learned. Hey, this worked, this didn't, got an idea about this. So the community of practice is growing. So even if you're new to it, or maybe you think I'm kind of there, but not really, or you're like, I'm advanced at this stuff, I should be the one talking at this event, come and join this community of practice. They're doing good stuff, they're helping each other, and they're accelerating the work. It's all built around the triple bottom line idea in all 12 of those categories, from organizational commitment to how we run our buildings, to how we design our services, collections, programs, partnerships, and prepare for what is coming. So I'll just point out, this might look like policies. There's policy examples there. It might be about how you treat your library workers. We really want to see library workers paid a living wage so they can thrive and be available to help our communities in these dire times. So treating library workers is one of those very first things we mention, acting with authenticity and treating our workers with dignity and respect, so we can do the same in our communities. It's hard to be authentic in our communities if we're not doing right by the people who run our libraries. How we clean our buildings, little things, right? Those little things add up to the big things. So great examples from libraries in the program. Just pop on the website for free, no problem. You can go see all of the certification presentations of libraries that have completed the work. That's a growing number every year. And so you can get all these great ideas, see how they solve problems and what they're doing about some of these issues. So I'm just going to close up here telling you one more story. This is a library in my system, the Pauling Library. For those of you in the US, we're in Dutchess County. Two of the women, young women in this picture, they're in high school, came into the library and they asked the children's librarian, can we reserve the library meeting space? Now, the children's librarian knew the library's policy was that no one under 18 could reserve the meeting space. But instead of immediately saying no, she asked why. Why are you asking to reserve the meeting space? And they said, we want to make the world suck less. And the librarian said, well, that's pretty cool because that's what we do here at the library. And so this really neat series of events happened where the librarian talked to the director. They made an exception for these kids. The kids got their peers to come into the library and have an open conversation of how do we make the world a better place here in Pauling. And the library staff was so inspired by these kids, their conversation, they actually assigned part of the library's programming budget to the kids. They got to decide what they worked on. They leveraged that money to do service programs and projects for the community. You can see here, they're all around. They made a bunch of blankets for folks in the homeless shelter. They used the library's digital media lab to make commercials for pets that needed to be adopted out of the shelter. They made superhero kits for kids that were in the homeless and domestic violence shelters. That was their vision of how to make the world a better place in their town. And that's all we're asking you to do, is to find those like-minded people who think like you do and want to make the world a better place. And we're just going to start where we are. So if you're looking for some help with this, we've got some starter steps for you. Just benchmarking greenhouse gas emissions, identify that primary climate hazard, subscribe to the e-newsletter of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, and start connecting with that community of practice that is really thriving right now. And use that roadmap to sustainability to capture your own personal thinking about what you're hearing, how it's intersecting with other things you've been thinking about, and to start plotting your steps forward for how you're going to amplify, accelerate the work that needs to get done here. So I'll just point out, this is the website. If you haven't heard it like 7 times in the chat box already, it's sustainablelibraries.org. Sign up for the newsletter, get the mobile app, come to our webinars, check out the resources, join the community on Facebook. There's just a lot of positive energy on something that sometimes can make you feel a little hopeless. So I'll just put my contact info up there for a few minutes. I hope you can tell I'm pretty passionate about this topic. I like when people connect and tell me what they're working on. I'll feature you in the next presentation. So I encourage you to connect with wherever your circle is of influence and really just do maybe one thing differently in the coming weeks and see how that goes and find other people that think like you do about the importance and urgency of this work. And so I hope you got at least one thing out of our presentation today that is helpful for you. I made this a good use of your time, but I'll settle down here and stop talking and thank Kendra for her wonderful facilitation of the event today and see if there's any questions that I can be helpful with.
Thank you so much, Rebekkah. That was very compelling, and I know it will spur many listening today to heed that call to action, including my colleagues here at OCLC. It was really helpful to see the practical examples that you provided, as well as concrete suggestions for the steps that libraries can take to move towards sustainable practices. Some of the things that we saw in chat were lots of comments around libraries looking for ways to both engage and inform the community around disaster preparedness, cooling centers, the whole generators, HVAC, heat pumps. That was a lot of conversation around there. And the idea of repair cafes definitely caught people's interest and resonated with folks. And we have some great examples in the chat as well, and people were sharing some resources around that. We also saw lots of excitement around the Sustainable Library Certification Program opening up to academic libraries as well. Yeah, congratulations on meeting that milestone. And the idea of making the world suck less definitely resonated. So we did have a few questions come through that we would like to spend a few minutes on. And one is from someone who's asking if you're in middle management within your organization, how do you get your administration to move on these initiatives?
I love that question because that's where I started. Right now I'm sitting in the executive director's office. I guess that's my office at the Mid-Hudson Library System, but that's not where I've always been, right? I started this work when I was in middle management, and I had to make the case to my executive director, who really challenged me. He did not buy in at the outset. He felt it was a distraction from the work we were doing on literacy and traditional library stuff, and he made me work for it. I had to get better at talking about it, which hopefully that came through today, that I had to be more articulate about the why behind what I was asking the organization to do. And one of the key lessons I learned is I had to align it with the institutional mission and priorities they'd already articulated themselves. Ourselves. So I think once I was able to show that it would help our staff work better together, once I was able to show it would have a positive economic impact long term on our organization, I saw the light bulb go off. And all of a sudden he was like, oh, this sounds really good. I'd like to learn more. And the next thing I know, he invited me to talk to the board about it. And we were able to, get started slowly, not as fast as I wanted. But it's that talking point I used before, is we have to remember a lot of us have been thinking about this for a long time and are seeing these examples and want to implement them. But we got to slow down a little bit to bring people along with us. Otherwise, we'll just burn out and we won't have the impact we're hoping to. So I'd say refine your talking points and really think about how you make your case effectively for anything in life, right? But that's what the roadmap to sustainability can help you do, is organize your thinking and get some of those talking points down. And remember to frame your message in a way that really connects with the person you're trying to convince. It is a sales pitch.
All right. This might this might be familiar to you, but someone noted that as a member of ALA, they don't notice any climate-related grants or programs that are available through ALA, and they're wondering if, as members, that they should advocate for the creation of these types of grants or other initiatives. Someone did note that the National Networks of Libraries of Medicine might be one place to look for funding in the environmental health category, but it'd be great to hear your perspective on that and where you think people might be able to look for some additional funding.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear you missed the Resilient Communities grant from ALA, because it was wonderful. And you leveraged a private donation to invest in libraries, envisioning what a resilient community would look like. And there's a really great report, actually, sorry for the sideline. I'll get back to the main question in a sec. But if you go to the LibGuide on ALA's website, maybe one of our friends online will share the link in the chat. You can see the report of the Resilient Communities grant money that was invested in libraries. So many good ideas came out of that program. So I'd say that the ALA staff is super responsive. The staff that have been assigned to the various committees I've worked on as a volunteer, they are in it with us. They get it. They look for opportunities to help us with the work. So I would say, and just give a high sign that, yeah, that's work we want to see happen, and make sure your reps on council know and understand that, and shoot those staff over at ALA a note, high-fiving them when they do great stuff in this area and asking if more is coming. Because I think the more they know the membership cares about this, the more energy you'll see given to it.
Yeah, and I also want to encourage people to think beyond traditional library organizations for potential funding. There are many organizations out there who are looking to make a difference in climate change and supporting healthy communities, and connecting what the library is able to provide to the mission of these funders. When you're able to articulate that, is a really great way to get funding from people who may not be thinking of the library. But with all of the examples that you provided today, I bet there are a lot of funders out there who don't even realize that this is something that's possible through their library. WebJunction has some great resources on helping to connect to funders, and we encourage you to check those out as well.
And Kendra, I'll just share my own story here. The Library of Local program that we have here at Mid-Hudson was because a funder I had never heard of called me and said, we were thinking that libraries might be a good partner in community resilience work. And I'm like, are they ever? I'm like, let me tell you about this book I just wrote. And we're like best friends now. So I think,
So
more people are understanding, but it's about that visibility we need to really be more strategic about too.
Yeah, we talk a lot about building that relationship, right? That reaching out to funders, maybe the first, your first ask isn't about money. It's about, do you know what the library is doing and how we can support things? So I think it's a really strong opportunity to be able to build relationships that can have lasting impact.
I'll just give a shout out to Juliana Robbins, who's on the call tonight from the California State Library. They've actually leveraged some of their federal dollars at the state library to invest in libraries doing work in sustainability. They even underwrite libraries that are going through the certification program. Matt and I had a meeting yesterday with 8 of the Northeast State Library representatives. So I think our state library communities are starting to really see the need to support libraries more in this area as well.
Great, thank you. So do you have any suggestions on how to create a sense of urgency in a compelling way, especially when communities are made up with people with various beliefs? Not everyone agrees that climate change is real or that it's important to address. How can we help people get there?
This really goes back to that idea of local. What are the very visible local impacts where you are? And I'll say that the biggest supporter of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative is the Suffolk Cooperative Library System. And the reason for that is because that area was hit so hard during Superstorm Sandy. And it crossed all political boundaries, all divisions in those communities. Everyone was hit very hard by that storm. We saw devastating effects from that storm. And people have a long memory about what that was like. And so as we start to think about, the fact after a disaster hits a community, people come together and help each other. And wouldn't it be nice if we did that all the time? So I think if we can connect to what people really value, which is safety, the health of their families, and we start to help them understand what the effects of climate change may be on their safety and the health of their families, not in a threatening way, just in a factual education way, you'll see more and more people who want to work together. It's why sometimes we use different phrasing in the work that we do. You'll notice we're not called the Climate Action Initiative because that phrase, climate action, has been politicized in the United States. So using the phrase sustainability, sometimes we talk about energy independence instead of renewable energy. Again, framing messages that really connect with the values of the audience you're talking to, and finding those common causes that more people want to work together on, regardless of where they're coming from politically, socially, economically. And I think community resilience work is a really great area, unfortunately, where people will come together and work together. But if you said we're going to do a program on climate action, I don't think you'd see the same response.
Okay, thank you. Following back on the idea of the sustainability project expanding to academic libraries, is there a press release or email that can be shared with members to help bring awareness to that milestone?
Yeah, it's in the newsletter of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative that came out on Monday, and a press release will be forthcoming. But if you're anxious, you want to get right on it, just pop on to sustainablelibraries.org. I believe it's the very first thing you'll see in the slider at the top of the website.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So many opportunities for people to engage in this work. And I think it sometimes can feel a little challenging and overwhelmingly. And someone actually asked, how do we keep hopelessness at bay? How do you stay motivated?
Yeah, this is interesting because I feel like I do presentations on this topic a lot, and that question comes up almost every single time. And I just want to say that I see you. I understand that feeling. It can be really overwhelming. And I think that's why the community of practice is so important, because that's where I derive my energy from. When I see my colleagues try, when I see a program that made a difference, when I see a whole community come out because the library decided this weekend we're going to help clean up the creek. When I see humans helping other humans, I think that helps me keep going. And I hope you find hope in that too. I think we're a very hopeful profession. We really believe in the power of education and the changes it can have in people's lives. And this is just another slice of that. We're just doing so with a little more deliberate urgency around pulling communities together in a way maybe we haven't on other topics, with the exception perhaps of digital equity and inclusion in recent memory. So I think that the hope you find is when other humans that are doing good work and trying to, but there's always that reminder that we sometimes need to hear that sometimes you need a break from it. It's very intense sometimes, and you have to be good to yourself and maybe take a break every now and again and regroup. Find those people that you can draw energy from to keep going with. And that's what's so great about our associations. You know, working with the American Library Association, IFLA, the New York Library Association, is really finding like-minded people that really lock arms with you to do good work and prop you up when you get tired or feel a little hopeless.
Thank you. And I want to remind people that this opportunity, sharing your stories, making your successes visible, sharing the challenges that you found and how you were able to overcome them, that is part of us all succeeding together. That when you go to meetings and you have an opportunity to share what you're doing and what's been effective, that community helps to strengthen that community of practice. It really is core that we have each other to reach out to build from, and to build upon the work that other people have already done. So many great examples have been shared today and are part of the sustainability program that there's a lot to draw on already, that can help take some of the load off of getting started, which I think is huge, right? We all just need to take that first step.
Oh, high five, Kendra. That's right.
So I think that's all the time we have questions for. But before we wrap up, I wanted to share a few details about how you continue to learn more about this topic. In the introduction, you heard that Rebekkah is going to stay engaged with OCLC through a series of 6 webinars with WebJunction that will take a deeper dive into sustainability topics. These webinars are open to everyone to attend, and I am certain she's going to bring the same enthusiasm, as well as some guest presenters who represent the perspectives of libraries who've been participating in the program. You'll find the registration link in chat so you can sign up and get those sessions on your calendars. I also encourage everyone to explore the viewing guide that was created to accompany this seminar. It is designed to extend your learning beyond this session and reflect on how your library is already engaged in sustainable practices, as well as where there are opportunities to do more. The viewing guide also contains a collection of links and resources, and presents a framework for guiding discussions with colleagues as you develop an action plan. You will get a recording of today's session, as well as all the links that were shared. So many of you were engaged in the chat, and we really appreciate it. It's what builds the community. So those will be captured as well. And again, Rebekkah, on behalf of OCLC, thank you. Your work with the Sustainable Libraries Initiative is clearly a passion, and we appreciate you sharing your expertise and providing the motivation for us all to take steps towards more sustainable practices. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Have a good day, everyone.